Mike, you're good to go.
Okay, good morning and welcome. I'd like to call the meeting to order. It is 9:15 a.m. on January 3rd, 2023. Stephanie, would you please take attendance?
Good morning. Mike Soltis.
Here.
Britt Marie Cole-Johnson will not be joining us today. Holly Williams will not be joining us today. Ava Bermuda Zimmerman.
Present.
And Ellen McCarrick.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome any members of the public for joining us and thank them for joining us. First item is to review and approve the December 1st, 2022 meeting minutes. I'd like to ask the committee for a review of the minutes and a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. Our next item, Dave and Jessica, would you please give us an update on the fund recovery project?
Absolutely. Good morning. I will share my screen.
You can see your screen, Beth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jess. Good morning, everybody. We are giving a fund recovery update to all the committees of the Connecticut Paid Leave Authority. Policy and Personnel is the last one. If you're on another committee, you may have seen it already. So I apologize if this is a double duty, but we just wanted to make sure that everybody got a fair share to know what we're doing regarding fund recovery. We're going to give you some background information on what our approach has been through now and what we're going to do in the future. So what have we been doing up through now? So up through now, the messaging has really been focused on registration. We haven't assessed any penalties or interest or fines or anything like that. The focus was really on making sure that employers were aware of the program, aware of their filing responsibilities, aware that they had to collect from their employees and remit to the authority. How do we do that? We emailed newsletters to businesses that hadn't been registered with the authority. We did that almost 2 years ago now, back in January and September of 2021. We got a list of unregistered businesses with some help from the Secretary of State's office. We also, in cooperation with the Department of Labor, they were able to offer catch-up periods to employers. And what employers were able to do were they were able to deduct an additional 1% beyond the 0.5% that they normally would in order for them to catch up on prior periods that they may not have done so. And we communicated these catch-up periods through various channels, email, newsletters, mass media, all the great stuff that Jess updates us on. The finance team also did outreach, sending about 7,000 communications to those accounts that were potentially non-compliant. And as a result of that, we collected over $1 million in contributions from over 800 employers that were non-compliant at the time. And we identified over 1,000 accounts that had been registered in error, either because their employees were non-covered and not eligible for the program, or the employer had closed and didn't have any employees, so thus was ineligible for the program. Next slide, please, Jess. Attached are a couple of examples of some of the communications we sent out. When I say we, I really mean Jess and her team On the left is a postcard that we sent out to employers. That was back in June 2021. And on the right are some examples of some letters or some emails that we had sent out. We had also, when we were sending these letters out, we also cross-referenced our list with the Department of Labor, also in an effort to ensure that we really were reaching out to all the employers that were known in the state and making sure they were aware of their responsibilities. Next slide, please, Jess. So our focus so far at the authority has been on registration. And so far, those efforts have been pretty successful. We've got over 140,000 registered employers at the authority. But at this point, in order to move the needle, we really think we need to shift the messaging more so from registrations and really focus on making the contributions and letting people know that there will be penalties and interest if you don't comply. This is part of our fiduciary responsibility and our continued efforts to ensure that the fund remain solvent. It also ensures fairness and equity because we want to make sure that all covered employers are contributing appropriately. And so we feel that a combination of refining our messaging with a new approach that incorporates better technology, more accurate information, and a consistent methodology will yield better results in our fund recovery efforts. Jen, next slide. Jess, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. My apologies, Jess. So what's the process we're going to do for this and how are we going to measure those results? So the process is as follows. We will continue our communication efforts via email and letters to those employers that are still not compliant and their third-party administrators, if applicable. Third-party administrators being their payroll providers, such as ADP, Ceridian, and the like. We'll also be sending updated notices with estimated data from DOL when it's available in order to advise employers of any outstanding contributions and any penalties and interest calculated from those amounts. We also will have an additional payment mechanism called PayLink in order to give employers another option to pay on amounts owed. The authority will also be utilizing one of the state's fund recovery vendors in order to assist in the recovery of those contributions that are getting older because the fund recovery vendor has the expertise in order to follow up on those. We'll also be having a communications plan with the United Way Contact Us Center in order to manage the expected increase in inquiries. So how will we measure the effect of what we're doing? We'll do that in two ways. Number one, we're going to measure the increase in the number of covered employers that were formerly non-compliant, but are now compliant and remitting contributions. Number two, we'll be measuring the dollar amount of those contributions remitted. And we'll be updating the board every 6 months and reviewing with them our progress at that time. I mentioned fines and penalties and interest a few times. Those will be implemented starting May 1st, 2023. That's the day after that the contributions for the first quarter of, we're going to do this
Dave, you're
in
cutting
our
in and out.
continued efforts to hold.
Excuse me, Dave, you're cutting in and out. Maybe if you turn off your video, it might work a little bit better.
Oh, thank you for letting me know.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
so far? Okay, all right, thank you. My apologies for that. Didn't realize. Thank you for letting me know, Erin. Okay, I'll backtrack just a little bit in case you missed it. Fines and penalties, including interest. So that we will begin implementing May 1st, 2023. That will be the beginning of the period. That's the beginning of the day after, actually, after first quarter contribution
well, we lost him again.
of the first quarter. At that time, we'll start doing so in our efforts to hold every eligible and covered employer accountable for remitting their contributions. If you make any contributions up until that time, the day before, April 30th, there will be no penalties or interest for anybody who pays in full up until that time. We feel this is a fair and equitable approach in order to hold all the employers accountable. We estimate that we'll be following up on approximately 6,000 accounts with about between $4 to $6 million in contributions that will be due to the fund. So at this point, I'm going to defer to Jess, and she'll give us some more information on the media and messaging that we'll be doing.
Thanks, Dave. So on this slide, you see some examples of some of the graphics that our partners at Miranda Creative put together for this campaign. And sort of the tagline is every employee counts. The idea is that we want to continue to drive home the point that no matter how small of a business you are, even if you have one employee, that employee counts, and you do need to comply with this program. We also are thinking of using different items that would pertain to people in some of these different industries where we know they are more likely to still either not be aware of the program or more likely think that they're too small to qualify. That's why you see the hard hat, the construction industry, the nail polish bottle, the salons, the guest check for the restaurants, etc. So that's the idea behind these graphics. In terms of our media plan, we are planning to launch in mid-January, so in just a couple of weeks. And we will be providing, of course, that notice that Dave just described, that the fines and penalties will start on May 1st, and that if past due payments are made before that date, that there will be no interest or penalties assessed. The campaign will run for about 3.5 months prior to the start of those penalties. In terms of our targets, we're thinking of 3 different target audiences. So the first being employers, and that message will be education, compliance, and hey, this is your last opportunity to remit without fines. You've had grace periods before, but this is sort of your last opportunity. We've had a lot of communication about the program, so we want this to be kind of our last outreach to say, we want you to be able to be compliant with this program without assessing any fines or penalties, so get your payments in. But if you don't, here's what's going to happen. Second target audience is employees, and this is going to be what we call pull-through messaging. So talking to the employees in order to get them to hopefully get the message back to their employers. And that message will be along the lines of check your paycheck, are your contributions being withheld? We've done this messaging before, so it's sort of twofold, not only for employees to look at their paycheck and if they don't see it to maybe inquire of their employers, but also for employers to hear it and know that now their employees are also being put on notice that they know the employer should be making these contributions as well. And then the third target is payroll providers. So we'll be doing some messaging to the payroll providers through our relationship with the NPRC, but also through the employers as well to say, even if you use a payroll provider, please double check your payroll and make sure that this deduction is being taken and being remitted. Because we know that oftentimes if there is a payroll provider, the employer is kind of hands off with that sort of thing, but we want them to understand that ultimately this is their responsibility as the employer, even if they have that payroll provider. And so we want them to double check to be sure. And if they don't see it, to consult with the payroll provider to correct that. In terms of the channels, we're going to be going heavily on the digital side with this because it allows us to target very specifically those 3 audiences that I just talked about. So we'll be doing a Google AdWords campaign, YouTube, programmatic display, which is essentially display ads that would appear for the specific groups of people on the different online channels that they're using. Social media will continue to play a big role with Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. TikTok is a new addition, and we feel that that's a good way to reach some of these very tiny businesses. We'll be doing email campaigns by placing ads in Chamber of Commerce newsletters, trade association newsletters. We'll have physical mailers going out to CPAs and small bank loan officers. Direct mail, as I mentioned, to payroll providers. And then we'll also use our radio messaging, as it's a very cost-effective way to get our message out there, and some ads in business journals as well. In terms of legislative outreach, we are in the process of updating our legislator toolkit, and so we'll be adding information about this into the toolkit. We have welcome letters that are going out to the newly elected legislators, and we're working with the caucuses to schedule webinars in order to give them briefings where we can update them on the program and specifically on this effort as well. So we know we've presented a lot of information, so just wanted to leave you with sort of the 3 key points that we hope you walk away from this presentation with. First, we're pivoting our messaging, and we'll be supporting the new messaging with a robust marketing campaign. And that focus, again, is moving from registration to contributions and the fines and penalties that will result for noncompliance. Why are we doing this? Well, we feel that it's our fiduciary responsibility, and we want to ensure equity and fairness in our approach. And we know that this is something that we need to monitor, and we will continually monitor this, report back with our results, and also make changes to our messaging and media campaign if necessary, if we feel that that is what needs to be done in order to move the needle. And so with that, Dave and I would be happy to hear your feedback or any suggestions you may have for changes or additions to anything we've talked about.
Okay, any questions or comments for Jessica and Dave? Hearing none, I have a few. So I think the number of accounts, one of the very early slides, was it 6,000 or 7,000 employers who were not contributing?
I think this might be the slide you're referring to, Mike, the following up on 6,000 accounts.
6,000, okay. So by my very rough math, using 140,000 total employers, that's somewhere around 4% who are not contributing, right? So there's always going to be some employers who are not contributing. We could strive for 0, but we're never going to get there. Is there a norm in the other states for a percent of noncompliance? I mean, is there some reasonable goal that we should be working toward to say, okay, this is kind of the norm?
I know way back when we were actively communicating with a lot of states, that was one of the questions we always asked. And the answers we got were somewhere around the neighborhood of 5% was the norm for those who didn't contribute. And those were from various states between California and Washington State and New Jersey, places like that.
So we're starting from not a bad place at 4.5%, and to the extent we could reduce that, all the better.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just making every effort we can to get the word out there and just making it fair for everybody. Like you said, will it ever be 0? I'd love it. Is it going to happen? Very unlikely.
Right.
But to the extent that we can minimize it effectively, both in terms of resources and cost and things like that, that's what we're going to try and do.
Okay, thank you. Just 2 other observations. One is, you mentioned fairness and equity a number of times. To me, we're beyond fairness and equity. We're into compliance. This is not a fairness and equity issue anymore. This is the law has been passed. You have an obligation to pay. You haven't paid. it's time to comply. So that's just an observation. The other is, I know you mentioned, Jessica, that TikTok is a new addition, and you may have been reading that a number of governments, including, I believe, the federal government, now prohibit use of TikTok for any official business because of its connection to the Chinese Communist Party. And I haven't seen anything about Connecticut, and I'm wondering if there's been any discussion or if there's any concern about using TikTok.
I saw
jump
Erin
in.
unmute, so I'm gonna let her. She was ready.
I'll jump in on that. So because I have teenagers, TikTok has been part of my life for longer than I would really like it. But the issue about the security concerns has been raised a few times in the past few years because of its connection. And I actually have been following it and tracking it. So far, there's been sort of no official sort of state action or discussion about whether or not there's concern. One thing is sort of just sort of awareness, right? Like in terms of what the content we're gonna put on it on TikTok is not is going to be content that sort of anyone can see, and it's kind of it's not going to sort of create links into anything secure or secret, and so I think there's sort of an awareness of it, but the practical reality is that that's where people are, and so we just want to get them where they are. I know, actually, plug for a colleague, Dan Schwartz, who writes the Connecticut Employment Law blog, actually had a blog post about, employers needing to be aware of TikTok and maybe utilizing TikTok in ways that they might not be thinking, because it isn't just for teenagers anymore. So I think we're just trying to be aware and savvy, and we will continue to pay attention to what the security folks tell us.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Dave or Jessica? No, okay, well, thank you for your presentation. Let's move to Michael. Michael, will you please give us your report on the 2023 policy priorities?
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. Feels like it's a good time of year to look back on the prior year and kind of start prepare for the upcoming one, and kind of think about what we want to accomplish over the next year from a policy perspective. So I just wanted to share really quickly a preview and have a discussion about the policy work, both in the short term this quarter, and then potentially a few things that'll take a few more quarters before we can accomplish on the policy front. The first, we had shared with the committee last month the audit guide for private plans. That's ready to go. We're ready to share it with the public for notice and comment. So we hope to bring that to the board meeting next week for that process to play out. What that means from a timing perspective is that we can, if everything works out well, there aren't comments that require us to readjust our approach, we should be able to begin audits of private plans beginning in March of this year. That's kind of the point where the audit guide would be able to officially be adopted. Second topic that we want to address for policies is the consolidated policy document. As folks know, it's sort of our comprehensive group of all of the policies and the way that the program interacts with the public, be that employers, be that employees, third parties, kind of how the program works externally. We wrote most of those policies and adopted most of those policies back in late summer, fall of 2021, before we had ever paid a single dollar in benefits. So they were written when the program was sort of up and running, but not yet a reality. So we just felt it's best to kind of review that form, make sure there's not anything that needs to be adjusted. And I'll give you a preview. There are some things that need to be adjusted. I have kind of three categories that I know are going to be part of that review and request updates to that consolidated policy document. The first is just typos, that type of thing, cleaning up grammar, a few consistent use of terms we need to make sure we address, how we refer to employees, how we refer to paid leave compensation, that sort of thing. That's kind of category one. Category 2 is sort of clarifying some existing policies. Some of the language, as we've kind of rolled out the program, could use a little bit of an update to make it clear what we meant. It was a little bit vague when we originally wrote it. And I'll give an example. We have a policy related to contributions, and when a contribution is paid on time versus when a contribution is late. And really that language right now just talks about the payment. From conversations with Dave's team in finance, we realized we probably want to make that clear that it's not just the dollar amount that you send us that's the contribution, it's the report of where to apply it to, what account to apply it to, what quarter to apply it to. The wage reporting is part of that submission of a contribution. So if you just send us $100, that doesn't mean you're paid. You got to tell us how to apply that. So that's just one kind of example of clarifying the language in the policy. And then kind of the third category is there's a few policies we probably can remove. As I mentioned, we wrote the policy language mostly prior to the launch of the benefits portion of the program. And there's a few things we thought we were going to do, and it turns out we didn't need to do. So as an example, we wrote this checklist that we were going to include as part of the claims process. A claimant would, identify what type of leave they were taking. It would tell them what documents to submit. They would check them off, sign the form, and send it back to us. It turns out that form was not necessary. We find out what leave they're taking during the intake process. We give them a welcome letter with all the forms they need to provide. So there isn't this need for this additional document. So we didn't use it, but the language of the policy still says you need to include that in the claim. So things like that we would like to remove as well. We don't anticipate as part of this process any new policies kind of coming up, but I mean, it's possible as we review it, you may find there's gaps, something we need to add. Obviously, we'll highlight those specifically when we share it with the committee and an eventual board for adoption. But that's not really the intent of this effort. It's really to review and make sure the language is what we want it to be. I hope to have this work kind of completed this month in order to share with the committee for the February committee meeting. Although it's possible, there's a lot of things we're working on this month that might get pushed to March. Third kind of category of policies we want to address is the private plans policies. Similar to the consolidated policies I just mentioned, we wrote policies back in the summer of 2021 on the application process for private plans, the administration of private plans, potential termination of private plans. Probably worth reviewing that again for cleanup, making sure it's up to date and what we want it to say. We also, as part of that effort, have identified at least one policy we'd like to add to the private plan application process related to, when you apply for a private plan, we would potentially not allow you to transfer to a private plan if you're still not up to date on contributions under the public program. So, when you apply, if you still owe us money for past quarters, we can potentially either pend your approval of the private plan or potentially rescind the approval of the private plan until those contributions are made. This wouldn't apply to any already approved private plans. It would sort of be new applications going forward from the moment of that adoption. So that's at least one policy we know we'd like to adopt going forward related to private plans. A few other topics really going to be tackled later in the year from a policy standpoint is the fair hearing process for any penalties, any disputes over, claim overpayments, any disputes over contributions. We have some language currently in our consolidated policies that talks about the hearing process, but it's sort of vague. We want to make sure it's robust, it's fair, gives due process. So we're going to just review that and make sure that is there any language you want to add to that policy. And sort of as an addendum to that, we want to explore what standards we want to include as potential waiver or reduction of those penalties. At the moment, we were sort of treating it ad hoc on a case-by-case basis and making sure we had a fair outcome for any penalty we would apply on a particular case. We just want to explore other standards we want to have up front for any of those topics. That's sort of it from like the known topics. We're obviously going to continue working with everyone in the authority, including the finance team, about what other policies might be adopted. There's possibly claims that are going to come up or questions from the public that will give rise to other topics for their policy standpoint. This is sort of what we had on the agenda for the upcoming year. I've obviously rambled for a long time. I open up to the committee for their thoughts. If you have any questions or comments about the policies I mentioned already, if you have any new policies you think we should address this year, we obviously value the committee's thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Any questions or comments for Michael?
Awesome.
I just have one.
Okay.
And it's prompted by one of your obviously learning from the past to would modify policies, add policies is terrific. I've been wondering about where we are with the appeals that go to the Department of Labor. How are we faring? Are we learning? I presume some of the appeals are being upheld, but I don't know that. Are we learning anything from that process that would prompt a review of it or a modification of it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. To be honest with you, that's my biggest insight into what's happening on the claim side is when I look at these cases on the appeal. So a lot of my learning about how the process is working, where things are, where there's gaps, where claimants don't know what's going on, is from the appeals process.
Mhm.
So that is my primary insight onto most of what I know about what's happening on claims. But that said, AFLAC and the authorities doing a tremendous job on claims from our appeals statistics. There's only been, I'm looking at the numbers right now, less than 20 total appeals where they've reversed the decision that we've made. So I think there's over 400, about 448 claim files have been uploaded as part of an appeal. Some of those are still pending, about a little over 100 are still pending DOL's decision, but that still leaves over 300 decisions that, vast majority of them are in our favor. Now, some of those, I will admit, Aaron or I are looking at that claim before it goes to, we provide the file and kind of move the process along in the appeals. And we've asked AFLAC to take another look because we think it actually should be reviewed and potentially the decision reversed. But the vast majority, they've administered correctly. Things are working the way they should. I think there's some opportunities for, awareness from the public, making sure that they know what documents are needed, that it doesn't come to a surprise that their employee needs to fill something out, their healthcare provider does. But at least as far as kind of the process, of administering that claim, I think it's actually going really, really well. At least that's my takeaway from the appeal side of it. I don't know if Aaron wants to add anything.
I would just note that the less than 20, I think the numbers are actually a little bit better than that. There's about a dozen, I don't have it up in front of me, but there's about a dozen where essentially DOL said, we think you made the wrong decision. Some of those we disagreed with, but we accepted their authority. Some of them they sustained in part and had slight tweaks to what we did. So, said we should have paid 3 extra days or something like that. So the vast majority have been favorable outcomes. Although, as Michael said, we still see a lot of folks who file for reconsideration internally and the appeal simultaneously. And so either we are asking AFLAC to look at it or AFLAC is already in the process of looking at it and it's at DOL. So our goal is always to get those cleaned up and be able to report, hey, this is already all set. So it doesn't, we don't need the DOL action on it because it's being dealt with. And that still happens a lot. So we do know there's a education piece there. I don't think there's much in the way of policy changes on that side.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Michael? Okay, Michael, thank you for your presentation. Let's move to Aaron, who's going to give us an update on staffing.
All right, so the most dramatic news is that today is Andrea's last official day with the authority. She will be the DSS commissioner starting tomorrow. Also leaving us as of today is Jacqueline Cozen. She's going to be the Deputy Secretary of State, being sworn in tomorrow, which is fabulous for her, not great for us. We will miss her, but it's a wonderful opportunity for her to work with Secretary Thomas. Excuse me. So we have some shifting around to do. The first one is that Michael will be the new official general counsel. So that is the easiest one. We're also restructuring some of Kathy Mihailik's job responsibilities to provide more assistance to Michael in connection with the private plans. She will take over private plan approvals from me, which is fabulous. And she'll also be helping with the audits and the appeals. John's team has been significantly enhanced by the hiring of a vendor performance manager, Priscilla, who started with us last Tuesday. She's got a great deal of experience in the insurance industry and actually was the vendor performance manager for an insurance company dealing with their TPA. So we're really excited to have her on board to help us as we continue to work with AFLAC and really kind of focus on metrics and audits and making sure that, again, as we're moving into steady state, they're moving into steady state and we're holding them accountable in very objective ways. So that's all happening. We do have some postings in IT. I think an offer was recently made for our Salesforce person for Lori. I know Dave has got a couple postings out. And we are at 31, I think, folks right now. I don't anticipate us growing over 40. I think we're going to be hovering around that 35 mark is my assumption, maybe 36, 37, but just kind of wanted to share those updates with you because new year and lots of shuffling happening. So any questions? Great. And then I just want to thank Ellen for meeting with me already as I meet with each of the board members on a one-on-one just to talk about strategy and planning for the year. So thank you, Ellen, and Michael and Eva, thank you in advance for making time for me. I know Amber's trying to get things on our calendars. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. One request. I presume you have an org chart.
We can update and share.
Yeah, that would be good. Beginning of 2023, that would be helpful to see, because, I mean, at least from my perspective, certainly, you know, we know the people who are in the meetings, but we hear the names, and I'm not quite sure where they all fit everywhere else.
Absolutely.
Okay,
We can do that.
thank you, Aaron. Any old business anyone wants to raise? Okay, any new business to be raised? Well, that brings us to adjournment. If I could have a motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn?
second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Abstentions? None. The motion carries. Thank you very much and have a wonderful and a happy and healthy new year.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.